The events you're about to see are based on real accounts. To protect the identities of those involved, names and details have been changed. My name is Braden. I'm 28 years old. I live in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I'm going to tell you something that happened to me over 10 years ago, but still haunts me to this day. For a long time, I tried to forget that night, but whenever I hear someone talk about invocations and urban legends, it all comes back to me like a punch in the stomach. I was 16 when it happened, and to this day, no one really knows what happened to Jenna. I don't know if telling this story will help someone, or just bring back the memories I'd rather keep buried, but here it goes. It was a Friday in March, and Mia, my best friend at the time, decided to throw a sleepover at her house. Her parents were out of town, so it was the perfect excuse for a night without rules. We were in our last year of high school, so any reason to hang out was enough to get us together. Besides Mia, I was with Jenna and Claire. It was that kind of night you expect to just spend laughing and gossiping until morning, but it turned into something else. Mia's house was old, with narrow hallways and a bunch of old mirrors scattered around. I always thought it was a bit creepy, but I never paid much attention to it. After a few hours of idle chatter and some horror movies, Jenna, who was always the bravest in the group, suggested we try to summon Bloody Mary. At first, everyone laughed it off, but she kept insisting, saying we were all just scared. Mia tried to change the subject, but Jenna wouldn't let it go. I remember her saying with that challenging smile, "You guys are afraid of some dumb legend?" In the end, curiosity and the challenge won, and we agreed to go ahead with it. We went upstairs to the second-floor bathroom, the oldest one in the house, and turned off the lights. Mia brought a candle and lit it, setting it on the sink. The mirror was a bit foggy from the steam earlier, but you could still see our reflections. Jenna stood in front, staring into the mirror with that look on her face like she was about to prove it was all nonsense. Claire, Mia, and I stayed a bit behind, laughing to hide our nervousness. Jenna started saying the name, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." At first, nothing happened. We just stood there in silence, waiting for something to change. But suddenly, the light from the candle started flickering, like there was some invisible wind passing through. I felt a strange chill, and Mia asked if we had opened any windows. Before anyone could answer, the hallway light flickered and went out. We were left in the dark, only the candlelight trembling. That's when I realized Jenna wasn't in front of us anymore. But she hadn't left the bathroom. There was no space for her to leave. She had simply vanished. The candle went out on its own, and Claire started screaming. Mia tried flicking the light switch desperately, but nothing worked. I was so frozen in place I could barely breathe. When the lights finally came back on, the candle was lying on the floor, and the mirror had a strange mark on it, as if someone had pressed their hand against it, but it was oily and blurry. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a smeared handprint on the glass. We started calling for Jenna, but there was no sign of her anywhere. We ran downstairs, frantically searching the entire house, but she was just gone. We called Mia's parents, our own parents, and even the police. They thought we were pulling some kind of prank or that Jenna had run off by herself. But I know what I saw. The police searched the whole house, the yard, the neighborhood. Nothing. No sign. No clue that she had left through any door or window. It was as if she had just evaporated from that bathroom. The following days were a nightmare. The whole school found out, and some students started making up stories that Jenna had run off with an older guy or something like that. But those of us who were there know that's not what happened. The police investigation went on for weeks, and Mia's house became like a tourist attraction for curious people and reporters. But no one found anything that explained her disappearance. The girls and I were questioned over and over. They asked if we had been drinking or using anything. Of course, we hadn't. We were just messing around until that damn game. The police even brought in experts to try to analyze the mirror and the strange marks left in the bathroom, but nothing made sense. There were no fingerprints, nothing to explain that odd smudge. After a while, the searches slowed down and the story started to fade. Jenna's parents moved away from the town, unable to bear living in the place where their daughter disappeared without a trace. I lost contact with Mia and Claire too, because honestly, none of us could look at each other without thinking about that night. People in the town kept talking for months, coming up with wild theories, but no one ever came close to the truth. Sometimes I dream about that bathroom. In the nightmare, I'm alone in front of the mirror, and the handprint appears again. Only this time, I can see Jenna's face behind me, screaming without sound, as if she's trapped on the other side of the glass. I wake up sweating and with the feeling that she's still there, trying to get out from some place no one understands. I've looked up a lot about urban legends and things like that since what happened, but none of it makes sense. It's like she was pulled into another place, something I'll never be able to explain. Even after all this time, I still avoid staring into mirrors for too long, especially at night. It's not that I completely believe in these things, but after that night, I don't have the guts to try it again. I always wonder, what if it wasn't Bloody Mary? What if it was something worse that we unknowingly summoned? One thing I know for sure is that Jenna never came back, and the fear of that night still stays with me, even though no one talks about it anymore. My name is Kevin, I'm 18 years old, and I live in Maryland. What I'm about to tell you happened in the summer of 2019, but to this day, I still get chills whenever I remember it. It was one of those hot June afternoons, and my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned house at the end of our street. We had been there a few times before, but nothing truly strange ever happened, until that day. The house was completely falling apart, with mold-covered walls and a ceiling that was about to collapse. But somehow, it always fascinated us. It wasn't just any house. It had a big history behind it that the adults in the neighborhood always whispered about, but no one ever dared to confirm anything. They spoke of an old couple who lived there, who mysteriously disappeared. Of course, it was just one of those small-town stories, but the house was always the center of our games. And then, like everything that's made into a taboo among us, someone came up with the brilliant idea of summoning Bloody Mary. I know, it sounded like a stupid idea. It was just a teenage game, something you do when you're bored and want to challenge your own fears. But at that moment, everyone was so excited and laughing that no one stopped to think about the consequences. Personally, I just wanted to be with my friends. So, we started. We all gathered in one of the dark rooms where the mirror was still attached to the wall, but with its edges shattered and covered in grime. I remember saying, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary," like it was a joke. Each time we said it, the atmosphere seemed to grow heavier. No one was laughing anymore, and suddenly the sound of our voices seemed to slowly fade away, as if something was becoming denser. That's when the lights went out. It wasn't a normal flicker. They just went off, and the darkness seemed to envelop everything with a strange force. The next few minutes felt like the longest of my life. I can say that for sure. The first thing I noticed was the screams. A loud scream, coming from inside the house that made the glass in the windows tremble. It sounded like someone was being tortured. The noise didn't make sense. It echoed in my head, and when I looked at the others, I could see the fear on their faces. There were no more laughs, only tense silence, pure anxiety. I didn't know what to do, but deep down, I knew it was too late to turn back. And then it happened. I looked at the shattered mirror in front of me. At first, I saw nothing, but then, as if it were an optical illusion, the cracks in the glass began to move. The figure started to appear. At first, it was just shadows, then a shape of a woman with long hair and dark eyes like they were empty. I don't know how, but I knew she was looking directly at me. Something inside me froze. It wasn't just fear. It was a feeling that I shouldn't be there, that something really bad was going to happen if I kept staring at that reflection. My body was frozen, but the worst part was when she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile or one trying to reassure me. It was a horrible smile, as if she knew exactly what was happening there, something that I could no longer deny. It wasn't just a reflection. The woman was in the mirror, but somehow she was also there with us, in that dark room. At that moment, everyone started screaming and running for the door. I was so paralyzed by fear that I could barely move. But when I finally managed to look back, the mirror was empty again. The silence was almost deafening. There were no more screams, but the smell in the air, something was different. The kind of silence you feel in your chest. And when I looked at my friends, they were all trembling, some even crying, but no one dared to speak. We didn't need to. We all knew what had happened there. The mirror. The woman. Bloody Mary. In the following days, something strange happened. No, it wasn't the house, but all of us who had been there felt like we were being followed in some way. Not physically, but there was a constant feeling, something watching us. When we left, we never met up again in that place. I went online to research, and to my surprise, the history of the abandoned house was more than I had imagined. Several old accounts mentioned a woman who disappeared there, and it didn't take long for me to make the connection with what happened that day. I never went back there, not even for a last look. We all just avoided that place, as if the very air around it was cursed. To this day, I can't understand what happened exactly, but one thing is certain: what we saw, what we heard, and the feeling that remained. It wasn't something I could explain simply. All I know is that when you mess with things like this, something gets released, something you might never be able to put back in place. My name is Todd Hargrove. I'm 42 years old and I live in Augusta, Georgia. I work as the owner of an antique store, and the story I'm about to tell happened about 5 years ago. I can't explain what happened, but to this day, I can't forget what I experienced. I don't even know if I'll be able to put it into words the right way, but I'll try. It all started when I bought an antique mirror. It didn't seem special at first, but something about it caught my attention. It was a bronze piece, with carved details along the edges, and the glass was slightly foggy, as if it had been stored in a damp place for years. I brought it to the store and placed it in the display window, unaware that it would change everything. It happened quickly, like a blackout, and the atmosphere in the store started to shift in a way no one could predict. In the first few weeks, the mirror seemed like just another decorative piece. But soon, some of my employees began to say they saw strange things reflected in it. One of them, Rachel, told me that after hours, she had seen the reflection of a woman with a blood-stained dress. She thought she was imagining things, and honestly, I tried to ignore it too. But then the reports from customers started coming in. The first time someone mentioned something strange was an elderly woman, a loyal customer, who was browsing the antiques with her granddaughter. When she got close to the mirror, she stopped abruptly and began to tremble. I thought she was just tired, but she told me that when she looked into the mirror, she saw the reflection of a woman bleeding, with hollow eyes. I froze. She even described the scene in detail. The woman had a pale face and her hair was soaked in blood. Something in her description didn't seem fantastical. It was one of those moments when I realized there was something more to it. That elderly woman wasn't the only one. As days passed, more and more people began reporting the same thing, always after dark. I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself it was just tiredness or some psychological effect caused by the store's atmosphere with the dim light and the old mirror. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Even the other employees began avoiding the area where the mirror was, and soon the entire store started to feel heavy, as if something invisible was lurking. It was one particular night that everything changed. I was alone in the store, closing the doors and doing the final check, when I felt an odd sensation wash over me. I went over to the display window where the mirror was, and when I looked into it, what I saw was beyond explanation. It wasn't just a vision. It was a feeling of presence. I saw the woman, just like everyone else had described. She was there, reflected in the mirror, with the blood-stained dress. But what shocked me even more was that she was staring directly at me, as if she knew I was looking at her. Her hollow eyes, the pale skin, the blood. It was as if she was calling me. I don't know how to explain what happened next. I ran to the phone to call someone, anyone, but when I looked at the mirror again, she was no longer there. The feeling of fear, however, remained. I couldn't sleep that night. Something inside me knew that this was real, more real than any logical explanation I could come up with. I tried to research the mirror. I found out it came from an old house in the area, a property that had been abandoned for decades. I went to the neighboring town where I found some old records. It didn't take long to uncover the dark story behind the mirror. It belonged to a family that, according to rumors, had been marked by tragedies and murders. The woman everyone saw reflected in the mirror was one of the victims, a young woman who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, her body found days later, completely drenched in blood. The worst part is that I couldn't undo the purchase. It was as if something was binding me to the mirror, making me a part of its story. Despite all the horror, I couldn't get rid of it. Deep down, maybe I was afraid that the mirror would leave me again, as if it were the only thing keeping me connected to all of it. The worst didn't stop there. I started hearing sounds in the store, low whispers, soft footsteps when no one was around. Sometimes I even felt a cold breeze, but never knew where it came from. It wasn't the kind of thing you could easily explain. When I went to the local church to talk to the priest, he just looked at me with a sad expression and said nothing, as if he already knew what I was talking about, as if he'd heard that kind of story before. It was after a few weeks that the mirror disappeared. I know it might sound absurd, but it just vanished. I woke up in the morning, and it wasn't in the display window anymore. There was no break-in, no one had entered the store. It just disappeared. I panicked, searched everywhere, but nothing. The mirror never showed up again. The visions stopped, the whispers ceased, and the heavy atmosphere that had taken over the store dissipated. To this day, I wonder if anyone else is seeing the same visions, if the mirror showed up somewhere else. I don't know what happened to it, or who or what was behind that energy. But since that day, I've never been able to look at a mirror the same way. I don't know if it was fear or some other force, but I'm certain of one thing. That thing was alive in some way. And, as much as the mirror disappeared, the feeling that something is still watching me hasn't gone away. My name is Arlo. I am 34 years old, and I live in Akron, Ohio. The story I'm about to tell happened about 5 years ago, but to this day, I still can't explain what happened. It may sound strange, but honestly, the things I saw and felt in that house still haunt me from time to time, and I know that if someone were to tell me this, I'd probably doubt it too. But believe me, there's no way I can make up what I'm about to describe. It was an ordinary afternoon when we received a strange package at our house. It was a mirror, an old and dusty object that had been inherited from a distant relative who had passed away. We didn't know this person very well, but my mom would always say that she had a heavy energy, and that for some reason the family never got too close to her. The mirror was wrapped in old paper with a somewhat antique style and a dark wooden frame, almost black. It looked like something you'd see in a horror movie, but it was just a mirror. We never imagined what would come next. We placed the mirror in the living room, where it remained in a corner, like any other old object we had inherited. It was just another thing to add to our home's decor. During the first few weeks, everything seemed perfectly normal. Nothing strange happened, and even the idea that the mirror might have some sinister history faded away. But, like everything in life, that comfort didn't last long. It was one night around 10 p.m. when something strange happened. I was in the living room watching TV with my dad when something made me look at the mirror. I don't know exactly what it was, but something felt different. That's when I saw for the first time the reflection of a woman. She was lying on the floor, bloodied, with wide eyes and a face full of pure desperation. I felt a horrible sensation, a knot in my stomach, but before I could do anything, she disappeared. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, and when I looked at the mirror again, it was empty, as if nothing had happened. I was in shock, but I didn't say anything to my dad. I was afraid he'd laugh at me or say I was imagining things. The next day, I told my mom and dad. At first, they didn't believe me, but when the same thing happened to them, the story took a different turn. My dad, who was always a skeptic, told me that the following night, while he was going to the bathroom, he saw the woman reflected in the mirror. She was standing, her hands covered in blood, staring at him. He was paralyzed, but as soon as he turned his head, she disappeared, as if she had never existed. What confused me even more was that each night the woman seemed more real. Her appearances became more intense, always at night. She began to appear later, around midnight, and always seemed closer, more vivid. Fear began to take over all of us. Not only were her reflections clearer, but it also seemed like she was trying to communicate, as if she wanted something from us. I don't know what it was, but the fear grew. The visions became more intense every night, and even when we closed the curtains and turned off the lights, the feeling that someone was watching us never went away. I could feel my heart pounding, the pressure in my chest, as if the house itself was swallowing me. My sister, who was 12 at the time, was the next to be affected. She said that one night she woke up with a strange feeling, and when she looked at the mirror, she saw the woman lying down again, but this time it seemed like she was crying, as if she was asking for help. The worst part was when my sister heard a voice whispering from the mirror, saying, "You can't leave me here." I'm not sure if she was dreaming or if the terror was real, but the expression on her face, I'll never forget it. She was pale, her eyes wide, and fear was written all over her face. It wasn't just the woman that was there. The sense of anguish, of despair, was so strong that it seemed to fill the entire room. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. The tension was in the air, in every corner. Every step inside the house seemed to be taken with fear of encountering yet another horrible vision in the mirror. The visions didn't stop. My mom tried to get rid of the mirror, but it was as if it were part of the house. Every time we tried to get rid of it, the mirror would reappear in the same spot. Sometimes it seemed to move on its own, as if it had a mind of its own. I even tried to cover it with a blanket, but the next day it was lying on the floor, and the mirror reflected once again the same woman with that horrific face. That's when my dad decided to research the mirror. He wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories, but he was starting to feel uncomfortable. He spent hours looking online and through old Akron newspapers until, after a late-night search, he found an article about the mirror. The text said that it had belonged to a woman named Eleanor, who had been brutally murdered in a fire in the house where she used to live many years ago. She was found with her eyes... I can't even describe what the article said. The worst part was that it seemed like the mirror had been some sort of portal, a link to her, who was still trapped in that object, waiting for something or someone. Since my dad found that information, the fear became almost unbearable. We couldn't sleep properly anymore, and the presence of the woman in the mirror was constant. It was as if she were watching us every move. No matter how much we tried to ignore it, the feeling of being watched never went away. Every night, the mirror seemed more threatening, more oppressive. I tried not to look at it, but something pulled me toward it, an invisible force that made me go to it, as if I were being drawn into the reflection. The last time I saw her, the woman in the mirror seemed closer to me than ever before. Her eyes were fixed on me, and the feeling that something very wrong was about to happen was impossible to ignore. The air in the room felt heavier, and I felt like I was about to faint. But inexplicably, that night, the mirror didn't appear again. It disappeared. We don't know what happened, but the feeling that something stayed behind in that mirror never left me. I still find myself looking at mirrors sometimes, expecting to see her reflection, but nothing happens. However, the feeling of being watched, of knowing that she's still there, haunts me to this day. We never touched that mirror again. It was left in a corner of the house where no one dares to look at it. I don't know what happened, nor why it all started, but I can guarantee one thing. Something in that mirror was not normal. I don't know if the woman was trying to warn us, or if she was just looking for something. What I do know is that, no matter how much we tried to forget, the mirror left a mark on us. Something in that reflection seemed so real, so alive, that to this day, whenever I look into a mirror, I find myself looking closer, expecting to see something. And I don't know if that's a sign that she's still there or if it's just my mind, but I've never been the same after that experience. I've never looked at a mirror the same way again. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like to support the community. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you next time.